Thank you. I'll try to stay close to the mic. Let me know if I wander from it. My slogan used to be "Have mouth, will travel." I didn't have to travel far to come here, here in the Twin Cities, where we all adjust to life in the Twin Cities. And I titled this, "Who Do You Think You Are?" Not in the sense of who do you think you are, but who do you think you are? And the point is that we are undergoing a traumatic shift in identity, which is very, very difficult to grasp. And what I want to do with this time I have is illuminate the big picture view of what is really happening, so that when you come down to the kind of more granular and detailed discussions that you have with the technical talks, or about AI especially, we can get a hold of how difficult it is even to have a conversation, because we are using different language to mean different things, or we're using the same language to use different things. In any case, I want to give you a big picture view of how I see what has been transpiring, because I don't think we realize how bad or how good it's going to get, especially as AI is really implemented going forward. I know I get email every day saying, listen to this podcast, listen to this seminar on AI, and a lot of it is not easily listened to because it doesn't address the core issues seriously. It's often somebody selling something or selling themselves a narrative that they want to believe. It's very difficult to predict the future. Yogi Berra, right? It's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. Okay, why is that? Let's start off with some philosophical underpinning. This comes from Nietzsche. I don't know does anybody read Nietzsche anymore? Any hands? Okay, I don't see a single. Is there one here? A couple of hands? Well, he was a German philosopher. It's true he went crazy at the end of his life, but he wasn't crazy all the way along, and had some of the most profound insights, and here is one of them. With the unknown, he said, when we're confronted with the unknown, we're confronted with danger and discomfort and care. And that's exactly what's happening in the world and in the technological environment today. The first instinct is to abolish the painful state. First principle, any explanation is better than none. We see that in the industry, right? Since at bottom it is merely a wish to be rid of oppressive representations, so one is not too particular about the means of getting rid of them. The first representation or narrative that explains the unknown as familiar, in a familiar way, using familiar language, feels so good that we consider it true. The proof of pleasure is a criterion of truth. Does it alleviate your cognitive dissonance? Does it make you feel better? Does it fit what you thought before was true? If it meets all those criteria, then the feeling of fear is alleviated. And he goes on. I do not know what meaning classical studies could have for our time if they were not untimely, he says. By this he means you cannot address people who are inside a paradigm by using the terms of the paradigm inside which they are. Robert Galvin, who did incredible work at Motorola when Motorola was a real powerhouse, and they had 3 breakthrough technologies under his tutelage, was asked what characterized the breakthrough ideas that they had. And he said, the first thing he noticed is that it often began as an opinion expressed by one person. And if it was said aloud in a group, often no one else heard it. But if they said it again and again, people heard it, but they laughed at it and they ridiculed it, and finally they called names the person who said it. And then eventually, when it took hold, they said they always believed it and they always had believed it all along. Why? Why is it thank you very much. Why is it always an opinion of one, or a minority opinion? Well, it's because when people come into a room And Galvin said, when we faced a challenge, whenever people agreed right away on a solution, it was always wrong. It was always wrong. Now, this is Galvin saying it, not me. Why was it wrong? Because the people solving the problem or addressing the challenge did so in terms of the paradigm of the past, which had assimilated them like the Borg, and they couldn't unthink the way they had learned from that paradigm to think. And therefore, when someone articulates a contrary opinion, as Nietzsche said, it causes discomfort at first, but it has to be articulated. That's what he meant by an untimely expression. It doesn't fit the time in which most people are living. You know that the chaos, and I won't go into detail, but the chaos of our political situation today is in part because people are trying to articulate a paradigm from the past that no longer holds or fits the economic or political or geopolitical realities of our time. So in other words, what Nietzsche is saying and what Galvin was verifying is that truths are illusions that we forgot were illusions, and truths held collectively by a group or organization or society must be confronted on behalf of a future people that do not hold these truths naively. In other words, you're speaking to the next generation, even if it's only tomorrow, not years, but tomorrow, younger people who have been socialized by technologies to such a degree and in such a way that they literally, at my age, sound different, live differently, think differently. So philosophies like this, really nothing other than these, will confront the illusions we share about privacy, security, and identity, because nothing else but an untimely solution will jar us into thinking about what you're discussing here for 2 days and in your work in a way that's congruent, not with the past, but with what is actually happening. So when we talk about paradigm change in a seminar room, it's easy because it's a phrase and it's a cool topic. But in our lives, it's more appropriate to call it what the Buddhists say is enlightenment, a nightmare in daylight. It so calls us to walk through a zone of annihilation of everything we thought to be true before, that we are willing to endure that seeming transitional chaos in order to arrive at the other side of the experience, which is like a conversion experience. Okay, so I'm talking about reality as best I can, which Philip K. Dick said will not go away simply because we refuse to believe in it. A veteran at CIA said to me that all of the scientific domains that they track, every scientific, not opinion, but scientific domains they track, have gotten so different from what they were that it's impossible for any expert in those domains to know everything being done or even keep up with one's area of expertise. So if you think of this in terms of the past, the present, and the future, what you can see is that all of us, if the line here is knowing everything about the domain of expertise we inhabit, if that's the present, then most of us live in the past in almost every other domain, and even in our own domains to a degree we live in the past and not the present. And so this redefines past, present, and future because we're talking to each other across cross-disciplinary lines that mandate that we have learned and express ourselves in different areas. So, Einstein said that time is a stubbornly persistent illusion. You know, if you look into quantum mechanics, he wasn't kidding. Time moves both ways. The arrow in quantum understanding moves both ways, past to future, future to past. And that's why I write fiction about this a lot. I've worked for 30 years with intelligence and security people, and it was an assistant deputy director at NSA who said to me one day, I don't remember apropos of what, but he said, you know you can't ever discuss all these things that we talk about here with you. And I said, I do understand that. And then he got a twinkle in his eye and he said, unless, of course, you start writing fiction. He said, fiction is the only way you can ever tell the truth. Now, he wasn't kidding. He meant that because of the inability to disclose literally and forthrightly the things that were true inside the agency or other agencies with which I worked, meant that I could only fictionalize the narrative, and that's exactly what I have done. Okay, what's happening right now? You know when you're on YouTube and suddenly the narrative stops and a pop-up ad, and it's so irritating, but you have to wait 5 seconds? This is the ad. The fiction I've written lately, this is called Mobius, a memoir, and it is the story of an intelligence professional who details what it was like to be recruited and live in that profession, first with gusto and then with increasing dread, as he came to terms with what it was that it compelled him to do and the impact it had on him to do that work. It turned into a trilogy, the Mobius trilogy, Mobius a memoir, Mobius vector, and a Mobius out of time. And all I'm saying is that if anybody wants one, discounted so heavily that I don't want to carry them home. I have copies of those, and Michael Getzman is going to, he has 4 sets of the trilogy that I think he's going to distribute in some way during the conference. Okay, so fiction really is the only way I learned I could tell the truth, by altering, in a Forrest Gump kind of way, my presence at different historical events and realities in order to weave a narrative that captured the inside of the agency life so successfully that someone at CIA, 20 years an analyst, recently wrote, it captured that life better than anything she had ever read. Okay, so we're talking about security on the basis of my experience, and I can tell you that Matt Blaze once said, some of you know Matt, the weakest link in the security chain is frequently the definition of the problem, and the definition of the problem is often not what we think. That applies to identity and individuality and privacy as well. I want to repeat that. The definition of identity, who we think we are, is often not who we think we are. And that profoundly impacts security, because if others know you better than you know yourself, it makes you immediately vulnerable to intrusion, surveillance, and manipulation in a way that you don't even know is happening. And that, of course, as you know, is the story of the internet. Now, let me go aside, see how we're doing here, for some history. The printing press with a mechanical, movable type was introduced into Europe in 1439. It played a key role in the development of the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Enlightenment, and the entire scientific revolution. William Caxton brought the printing press to England in 1476, and it was revolutionary. How so? Because printing transformed what it meant to be a human being. When something changes the world radically, we often exaggerate the impact. But think of the internet. The first claims attending it were a little crazy, but in the long term, we always underestimate the impact. Again, think of the internet. We go through denial and depression and all those things, finally come to acceptance. But remnants of past behaviors, how prior technologies socialized us and taught us to think of ourselves and behave as they framed our lives, then go into the background, and we forget that we have been socialized by them. So people who for example, in writing, when writing was introduced, speech, writing, printing, and then the digital world. When writing was introduced, it transformed human consciousness in such a way that people in writing cultures could not easily communicate with people in oral cultures. And when Caxton brought the printing press to England, it revolutionized the social worlds in which people lived. Their religious, their scientific, their cultural lives, everything. That created political unity when the language we call English was stamped through printing on the mindsets of the people who lived there. We called it England subsequently, which it wasn't called before. So the language printing imposed homogenized the culture over time, and people didn't even know it because they simply thought in terms of what was written, and printing did the same. I bring this up because AI is going to do the same thing. It is going to so transform what we understand ourselves to be able to do, and therefore who we think we are, that it is going to usher in a great chasm between those who get it and those who don't, and those who can live with it comfortably, or those who, as Nietzsche said, impose a prior paradigm on it in order to make themselves comfortable. We often do not know how to talk about AI because we don't know really what is coming. I think of the lines from William Butler Yeats, "What rough beast slouches toward Bethlehem to be born?" Or listen to someone smarter than me talking about the internet decades ago. This is Langdon Winter. To invent a new technology requires that society also invent the kinds of people who will use it. Older practices, relationships, and ways of defining identity fall by the wayside, and new practices, relationships, and identities take root. Pretty profound. In case after case, the move to computerize and digitize means many pre-existing cultural forms have suddenly gone liquid, losing their former shape as they are retailored for computerized expression. As new patterns solidify, both useful artifacts, including cognitive artifacts, and the texture of human relations that surround them are often much different from what existed previously. Okay? When I used the words English and England a moment ago, you probably thought we had a common understanding of what was meant. But in fact, when we say the name of any nation state today, including the United States of America, it is not what it used to be because borders have been made porous or completely been erased by new technologies which have enabled transitions of information in and out of those structures to transform them as the information moved. And so we use the language of the past, but it's kind of like attending a Shakespeare play. People in the audience think they understand what they're hearing in Elizabethan English, but at least 25% of the words do not mean what they used to mean. And let me give you the key one for this talk. The word is individual. The word individual holds an important place in today's society. If asked the meaning of the word, a person would say an individual is a person, one person. The most recent meaning of individual in the OED is of, pertaining, or peculiar to a single person or thing. But if the same question was asked in the 17th century, just a few hundred years ago, when the printing press was just making its impact, a different answer would be given. The word individual was almost never used, and when it did, this is what it meant: the state or quality of being indivisible or inseparable. It did not mean a person. The change in the meaning of the word individuality is related to the breakup of the medieval social, economic, and religious order. And we could conceive of individual people in a radically different way. Not that we didn't know we were different people, but we conceptualized who we were in a radically different way, and we became individuals. You so use that word with customary ease and familiarity that we forget that only a few hundred years ago, that designation, that denotation, literally did not exist. The new use of the individual helped define a person's place in society. And why am I going into all this about individuals? Because privacy, if we have used the word, has meaning only for an individual. Privacy has meaning only for an individual. And this meaning of individual no longer applies to humans today in the same way. Really, even though we think we're individuals, we have to look at what came along, what baggage with privacy and individuals. Andrew Grove said 25 years ago, privacy is one of the biggest problems of the new age. At the heart of internet culture is a force that wants to find out everything about you. And once it has found out everything about you and 100 million others, that's a valuable asset, and people will trade it and do commerce with that asset. This wasn't the information that people were thinking of when they called this the information age. We think of privacy as tremendously valuable. We say it's a human right. Yet we live in the Facebook age, in which the only thing more cherished than privacy is publicity and, of course, profit. We share personal data in flagrant ways, but believe we have a right to privacy when we choose to keep things private, and we don't. Privacy has gone poof. It literally is gone, and it's not going to come back. You see, because our identities are defined by boundaries, and boundaries around everything from individuals to nation states or geopolitical structures, and I would suggest soon planetary cultures, are going down. So, what's happened to the individual along this route? What's happened to privacy? Privacy is honored in lip service, but not in the marketplace, where it is violated or taken away or eroded every single day. You know this. Not in intelligence operations, certainly, does it mean what it did, nor how computers and software are built. Someone said if voting were important, they wouldn't let us do it. Well, if privacy was important, it would be honored. Other things like power and money are much more important than privacy, and that's why there is no, as recently as this morning, the Republicans in the House of Representatives took out the connection between privacy and individual rights. So the bill has been emasculated about privacy that looked like it might have some real power and teeth. I wrote in a forecast of security issues at the turn of the century, quarter century ago. The only way to protect data is not to collect it in the first place. That was true, and that was ignored. We give it all away as if it's of no account because we cannot see or feel the ends to which data analytics puts our little biographical bits, our daily choices. Everyone who can collects data, and everyone who can sells it and parses it together. Not data, but information. Information, as Shannon said, is the difference that makes a difference. A lot of data is noise, but from the data come signals which lead to information. And those who have the information leverage it on behalf of their own self-interest. You see, we're talking about identity. We're not just talking about privacy. We're talking about identity. Kids today have been socialized by different technologies. I remember when we used the word internet. A kid today doesn't have any concept of the separate internet. They are always on the internet. It is part of them. They have been bonded to it. And they can't multiply well or write cursive. And they use Google instead of remembering often. But they do not experience that as a loss. Only people who used to do those other things think it's a loss. We don't regret the replacement of horses by autos. Remember horseless carriages? That was a term, and naming things is an act of creativity, that humans drove themselves for a century or so. Soon we will not say driverless cars. We will call them something else when we have a name to give them that means what they are. That kind of reinvention of the names of things in our environment is exactly what I'm talking about. Well, writing and printing made introspection, which we take for granted, meaningful. Books, small, portable books, could be read to oneself. An interior space emerged in our minds, and what we call privacy, our private space, and inside, defined by a boundary around it, that emerged as well. In other words, writing and printing created the experience of individuality as we understand it and gave us a new definition of individual, a different way of thinking who we were. And who we were was defined as people with rights. We take for granted that there are human rights, intellectual property rights, digital rights, privacy rights. The word rights was not used in that way until the 18th century, when the culture had changed as a result of the technologies that transformed it, so that the notion, the thinkability of rights emerged for the first time, could be defined in Trinding law. And now, if you pick up any news journal any morning on the internet, you see rights are being thought about all over. And one of the reasons is because rights as we understood them no longer exist. Where is this going? Boundaries have gone down in meaningful ways. You can speak of a polity for America, but the nation state called America has been superseded by transnational geopolitical entities that have created their own environment for conducting their lives, their business, their financial activities. I have a friend who went to Davos recently, and she said that what really struck her was that nobody referred to an identity that they had in terms of where they came from as a nation state, because they had created an alternative structure with offshore banking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where they live like Lando Calrissian's Cloud City, floating above the world in which the rest of us think we live, but they are often pulling the levers in those worlds which connect to the exercise of power in this world. Okay. So the result of all this is, as you know, by giving all this information away, we are known better by others than we know ourselves. Others can put together the data that they have extracted from, synthesized, integrated, and articulated as a different vision of who we are, so that we can then be exploited. Disinformation on social media is only one aspect of this. All behaviors, including the most trivial, when aggregated and mined for patterns, reveal much more than the surface of the person, and I'm suggesting that we carry in our heads a notion of ourselves that is the surface of our own personhood. We are cells in a body. So, computing and digitalization was the engine for this new emergence of humanity. We became nodes in a network. You didn't hear about corporate work teams or cooperative learning in schools before the internet kind of back-formed humans in its image as nodes in the network that it provided, so that we understood ourselves not as individuals anymore, but as parts of conglomerations of people, as teams. When I talked to teachers about what the internet was going to bring in the early 90s, this was a shocking revelation, because education was in the process of being transformed from a top-down hierarchical structure to one in which people were responsible for their own lifelong learning. What does it look like to be part of this revolution? Well, at MIT, someone was speaking in the mere cell phone, and he said, phones can know. People can get this God's eye view of human behavior. After analyzing more than 16 million records of call date, time, and position, researchers could determine that taken together, people's movements disclosed a mathematical pattern with enough information about past movements so they could forecast where someone will be in the future with 94% accuracy. For us, he said, people look like little particles that move in space and occasionally communicate with each other. We have turned society into a laboratory where behavior can be objectively followed. It is not just about observing what is happening, it's about shaping what is happening. These patterns are allowing us to learn how to better manipulate people, trends, opinions, and mass psychology. So, you can see why I claim that privacy is gone and is never coming back, and individuals are gone in the way we used to think of them, and so are nation states. An example of that, when the CIA was stood up, the CIA was intended to operate only in other countries. We were given permission to break the laws in every other country, bless you, except our own. Today, of course, we break a lot of the laws in our own country too. When the FBI was set up, it was to be a police organization that operated only in this country. But after this transformational era that I have described had taken place, the CIA is very active in this country, and the FBI is very active with stations, offices, and special agents in charge all over the world. In other words, the boundaries that defined our sphere of action have been effaced or erased, and we now have to live in these transplanetary, transnational structures that have emerged in their place and still interact with nation states, but in a different way. And we don't have names for those yet. We can call America America and think we know what we mean, but as I'm saying, we don't. An example of this was when I was giving a talk and the special agent in charge of the Chicago FBI office was sitting there listening to me describe what had happened, and he said, bingo. And I love to hear bingo. He said, what do you mean by, I said, what do you mean by bingo? He said, not long ago, we used to be able to go to American citizens and ask for their cooperation, and we always got it because their primary identity was as Americans. Today, what I often hear back is, I would love to help you, but, and that but is the kicker, but meant that the true sources of influence on their identity, their behavior, and what they believe they're capable of doing is a transnational entity, like Apple or Citigroup or a million others that are national, transnational, and all of it, but are that in a way that gives them more power over the individuals who work for them than the nation state itself does. So that's what he meant, that the sphere of operation for the FBI itself had been transformed by the blurring of boundaries. So, this is serious stuff. So when you hear talks, as you will, about AI, the key thing I want you to do is ask yourself, do I really know what I mean when I use the word AI? We're getting AI buzzed in our ears all over, but I don't know that we know what it is. An FBI guy said to me not that long ago, your choice, he meant the citizens of the country, is not between Big Brother and no Big Brother, but between one Big Brother and a lot of little brothers. He said, think carefully before you choose. And I said, number one, I don't choose, and number two, we have both. We have one Big Brother. We live in the surveillance era of unparalleled reach and extent and power, and we have that kind of surveillance done, empowered by all kinds of technology companies that are not accountable to anyone except to themselves, that enable the worst actors in the world to track their citizens for nefarious means. This shift has been traumatic. I do think that in some ways the entire society is in a condition of PTSD. It doesn't remember very well. It is prone to lash out at the wrong things. It is off its feed in a lot of ways, And if you simply turn on what we used to call the nightly news, which is not that at all, but if you look at it, you see it's a scare machine designed to keep people glued to the television set, or the screen, I should say, so they can make money. Eyeballs equal money. You're not getting news from the news, you know that. And the impact of dealing with all this is serious and profound. I did a talk called Playing Through the Pain for DEF CON once, because I realized how many of the people I talked to in intelligence and security were revealing stories of what it did to them to do the work, and that became the subject of Mobius, my trilogy. And when I decided to do that talk, I wrote to colleagues and said, can you provide any stories for me? And you know, over 50 from intelligence, security, corporate, and the military sent powerful stories which fueled 2 talks at DEF CON on that subject. And one person said to me, when you were giving that talk, did you hear people crying in the room? And I hadn't, but he said there were a lot of sniffles and a lot of tears. And one guy stopped me on the way out, and he said with tears, you have defined my life for the last 17 years. What does it do to you to do this work? Dan Geer told me no one can do this work. So did Brian Snow from NSA. Unless you have seen the face of evil, unless you see what people are trying to do. It's easy, said one security practitioner. All I have to do is keep out the entire internet, while what they have to do is so hard, just find one way in. It does things to people to do this work, and I'm encouraging you to be vigilant and mindful of how it is that the work takes you over in some ways. I was once trying to engage medical committees in Milwaukee in dealing with the torture that was being undertaken by our side in Iraq at the time, contrary to the Nuremberg tribunals, which we set up, and none of those people would do it. None of them wanted to rock the boat or interfere with their sources of funding. But what it does to a person on the ground, he's gone now, but chief scientist of NSA at one time literally sobbed in my arms as I held him because of the loss of life on a mission his work had supported. And all he kept saying was, what more could I have done? What else could I have done? You know, when you're doing security work, there's always more that you can do. So not everybody inside the agencies has the balls to speak the truth to power. In fact, few do. My friend Brian Snow, who's senior technical director at NSA, got a challenge coin from his own organization from the director. And he said he was given the coin because the director said, why haven't I heard about this before? Why are you the first person bringing this infraction, this behavior, this cultural-wide behavior to me? Why didn't I know this? And he rewarded him for his truth. Well, don't forget, there was a conversation in that director's office once where the liaison with the Brits said, you know, we need to treat the Brits differently because they're our special friends. And he couldn't go on because the deputy director of SIGINT interrupted him. And he said, excuse me, you're forgetting something. We have no friends. We have no allies. All we have are targets. And that's why every time it's revealed that one of our allies or friends has been targeted for radical surveillance, it's just shrugged off by everybody because everybody does it. So, how do you change the paradigm? Well, you don't. The paradigm changes you. And the best we can discover is a way to be conscious of what it is doing to us so that our conversations about what we're doing in our work are meaningful and to the point. Bruce Schneier said, I'll quote him, surveillance is the business model of the internet. The more these companies know about the intimate details of your life, the more they'll profit from it. Already there are dozens and dozens of companies that secretly spy on you as you browse the internet, connecting your behavior on different sites and using that information to target not only advertisements, but exploitative phishing emails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the things you know about. You use multiple internet devices, computer, smartphones, Internet of Things, so-called, devices like smart thermostats and appliances, which have been demonstrated to be means of hacking you. All of these devices are spying on you, and yet most people continue to buy them, use them, and not know what the possibilities for exploiting them are. So, the real questions remain. How do we live vibrantly? How do we free our minds to grasp and act on what is really real? How do we live in a world that has no walls anymore? As I said in my presentation for the New Paradigms in Security workshop some time ago, I called it Changing Context of Security and Ethics. You can't have one without the other. Information security is one task, both offensive and defensive, of the intelligence community that sanctions breaking foreign laws while prohibiting similar activity on American soil, but simple distinctions of foreign and domestic no longer hold. The convergence of enabling technologies of intrusion, interception, and panoptic reach, combined with a sense of urgency about the counter-terror imperative and a clear mandate from our leaders to do everything possible to defeat an amorphous non-state enemy defined by behaviors rather than boundaries, borders, or a clear ideological allegiance, has created an ominous but invisible and seemingly inevitable set of conditions that undermine all previous cornerstones of law, ethics, and even religious traditions. The dire possibility of societal disintegration, I'm not kidding, elevates the moral responsibility of the security and intelligence communities to a higher level. You are linked in a cooperative activity responsible for maintaining social and global order at a level of understanding that is far beyond that formulated in the past by any one nation. You globally all interact in a way to sustain and transform the culture and the meaning of our humanity. These communities constitute a global community. You share an ethos and modalities of operation not available to ordinary citizens. My spy, Mobius, got such a rush out of being able to do and see and act in ways that normal citizens couldn't even conceive, because he had permission to do it once he went into the agency. And that's just the way it works. So we recognize that in practice, moral order and ethical norms, but in practice, they're violated every single day. As a friend from Special Ops said to me the other day, ethics, when we hit the ground, we're told you do everything you need to do to complete the mission. That's ethics. So what you're doing is not simply protecting networks. What you're doing is engaging in a transformational enterprise, the scope of which, the reach of which, is beyond our easy ability to understand. And all I'm encouraging you to do by giving this broad overview is recognize what's happening and be mindful and be vigilant. Okay, thank you. Now